The attic was always too warm in summer and too lonely in winter. But it was mine, my quiet little sanctuary above the noise of family dinners and Sunday football. That's where I kept the things no one ever asked about. Old letters, birthday cards they scribbled on when they still loved me in crayon. A locket from Tom, the kind with a hinge and a secret inside. I didn't keep them for decoration. I kept them because they reminded me who I used to be. Not mom, not grandma, not her again, just Evelyn. Sometimes on rainy days, I'd sit up there and open one thing at a time, run my thumb across the edge of a faded photograph, breathe in the smell of old wood and lavender sachets. And for a moment, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't waiting for someone to need me. I was just remembering. They never noticed the things I didn't put on shelves. They never asked what I kept or why. But oh, they'd notice if I threw something out that they thought was useful, like a broken coffee pot or that awful blender that sounded like a chainsaw. I remember once Grace came by, unannounced as always. She stood at the bottom of the attic stairs, hands on her hips like I was a teenager hiding something. She asked if I still kept junk up there. I smiled, quietly. I said, "Some things just don't belong in the trash." She didn't ask what I meant. She never did. One velvet box held my wedding ring, the original one, not the replacement Tom gave me after the fire. The original was simple, gold, thin, and warm from all the years I wore it before he got a better job and thought I needed diamonds to feel married. I didn't need diamonds. I needed him to stop coming home late. But he never tucked love in a velvet box. He gave me shiny things when he didn't know what else to say. I kept them both anyway. Behind the flower tins, I kept the letters Jeremy wrote from college, back when he still called me Mama at the end of each note. Before he married Linda and started acting like I was a character in someone else's past. He hasn't written anything in years. But I still keep those letters. Not because I think he'll write again, but because I want to remember that once he did. There's a pressed rose from my 40th birthday, flattened between the pages of a cookbook no one uses anymore. Tom brought it home that night. I was wearing blue. He said, "You're still the prettiest girl I've ever seen." He meant it then. And that's what matters. Some nights, I wonder what they'll do with all this when I'm gone. They'll find the boxes, open them like archaeologists poking through someone else's grief. They'll laugh at the handwriting, toss the perfume bottles, donate the scarves that still smell like Sundays. They'll keep what looks expensive. And they'll miss what mattered. But that's the thing about quiet treasures. They're not meant to impress. They're meant to hold the parts of us we're too tired to explain. The parts we know they'll never fully understand. I once asked Rebecca, my youngest, if she wanted my cookbook someday. She wrinkled her nose, said, "I don't really cook, Grandma. I'll just find the recipes online." I nodded. And later that night, I slipped the handwritten biscuit recipe back into its sleeve, the one her mother and her mother's mother used. The ink is faded now, but the fingerprints in the margin? Still mine. The attic window creaks in the wind. There's dust on everything, and the boxes are stacked unevenly now. But I don't move them. They've earned their place, just like I have. One day, when someone finally sits still long enough to ask about me, not what I did, not what I gave, not what I forgave, but who I was. Maybe I'll show them the little blue ribbon from my first cake contest, or the chipped mug Tom gave me the day I told him I was pregnant with Jeremy. Maybe I'll tell them how scared I was. Maybe I won't, but I'll still have the box, and everything inside will still be mine. I used to count the thank yous. Not because I needed them, not at first, but because they meant someone noticed. Noticed the pie cooling on the counter, noticed the late-night ride I gave without complaining, noticed me. But thank yous are soft things, easy to drop, easy to forget, like jackets left on chairs or birthday cards left unsigned. It started with Tom. He came by one afternoon, sweaty from moving boxes, said he just needed a little help to get through the month. I handed him a check, more than I should have, and he didn't even sit down. He folded the paper, stuck it in his back pocket, and said, "You're a lifesaver, Mom," as he walked out the door. No eye contact, no hug, just the sound of his car backing out before I could ask if he was staying for dinner. I stood in the doorway for a while after that, watching the dust settle in the sunlight, like maybe if I waited long enough, the door would open again. It didn't. Then came Lisa. She used to knock with both hands, the twins bouncing at her hips, and kiss me on the cheek with a laugh. But that day she pulled into the driveway and barely got out of the car. Just opened the back door, waved from the front seat, and called out, "Be good for Grandma." The kids didn't even look back. And Lisa? She drove off before I could say, "Do you want to come in for tea?" I stood on the porch holding little Emma's backpack like it was proof I still mattered. She was only 3. She didn't know I was hurting. But I still wiped my eyes before I turned around and said, "Who wants grilled cheese?" Because what else do grandmothers do? At first, I told myself it was a phase. They were tired, busy, distracted. I made excuses for them the way I used to patch up their skinned knees, quickly, gently, without asking too many questions. But the silences grew. The favors increased, and slowly I became something else. A ride, a babysitter, a safety net. They needed me, yes, but needing isn't the same as loving. Not the way I remembered it. I used to get phone calls just because. Now they only call when something breaks or someone cancels. "Could you watch the boys this weekend? Do you still have that folding table we used at Christmas?" Never, "How are you?" Never, "Do you need anything?" One evening, I made a pot roast, the kind that takes hours and fills the whole house with garlic and thyme, just like I used to when they were young. I lit the good candles, put on music, and even ironed a tablecloth. No one came. Tom said he forgot. Lisa texted she was stuck at soccer practice. I ate alone. 3 bites, then wrapped everything up like leftovers no one would touch. The house echoed differently that night, not empty, just hollow, like something important had been taken and no one remembered to return it. I started writing things down after that. Not poems, not stories, just lists. What I did, what I gave, what they asked for. Not to shame them, but to remind myself that I was still doing something, that I hadn't just faded into the wallpaper with the rest of the forgotten things. Sometimes, late at night, I'd imagine walking away, not out of spite, just to see if they'd notice, if anyone would knock and say, "We miss you," if anyone would remember the sound of my laugh or the smell of my soup. But I never did, because no matter how quiet the thanks became, I still loved them, deeply, fiercely, even if they couldn't see it. Maybe that's the hardest part. Loving people who only remember you when they're hungry, tired, or in trouble, and forgetting yourself in the process. I hadn't taken the ring off in over 30 years. Tom gave it to me on our 25th anniversary, not because we had money, but because we didn't. It took him 14 months of night shifts at the warehouse. Ruby, deep red, not too large, just enough to catch the light when I stirred the soup or folded the laundry. It meant something to me, not because it sparkled, but because he tried. That afternoon, we were sitting around the kitchen table after lunch. I'd made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, even those silly little crescent rolls Jeremy still liked. Nancy was picking at her plate, barely eating. She kept eyeing my hands. At first, I thought she was admiring my nail polish. I'd done them myself that morning, just a soft pink to feel a little more like someone. But then her eyes settled on my left hand. She leaned forward, slow but certain. "Is that the ring Tom gave you?" she asked, already reaching. I didn't answer, not right away, because her fingers were already sliding the ruby off my knuckle, like it was hers, like I wasn't still warm in the chair. "Oh, it's heavier than I thought," she said, laughing, holding it up to the light. "And it's real?" Jeremy didn't flinch, didn't say a word, just sipped his coffee and chuckled. Chuckled, like I was a jewelry box, like I wasn't still wearing my wedding sweater, the one with the tiny embroidered roses, the one Tom said made me look like spring. I looked down at my bare finger and felt something cold there that had nothing to do with metal. "Nancy," I said, softly, and she turned to me, smiling, too wide. "Oh, I was just curious, Mom. I mean, someday it'll be mine, right?" She winked at Jeremy like we were all in on a joke, but I wasn't laughing. I was remembering. I was remembering Tom's tired hands the day he gave me that ring, the way he tucked the box in the side of my apron pocket and said, "It's not much, but it's ours." I wore it through funerals and birthdays, holidays, and hospital visits. It was mine. I held out my hand, quiet, palm up. Nancy looked confused for half a second, then placed the ring back, a little too carelessly, like it didn't matter now that it wasn't hers. Jeremy cleared his throat. You know, Mom, we've been meaning to talk to you about, future arrangements. He said it like I was already halfway gone, like I hadn't just cooked his favorite meal, like I was a file to sort, a key to copy, a will to divide. I nodded, slowly, because I already knew. They didn't come for the food. They didn't come for me. They came to measure the drapes, count the teacups, guess what might be valuable and what could be tossed. I watched Nancy glance toward the china cabinet, the good dishes, my mother's teapot, the silver I never used. She saw objects. I saw Sundays. I saw hands that washed every piece by candlelight when the power went out in '83. I saw Tom holding my waist in that kitchen, whispering, "One day we'll have a dining room big enough for everyone." That day never came, but the love did. It's funny. When you're young, you think what you leave behind will be the stories, the values, the recipes. But some people don't want the memories. They want the ruby, the deeds, the things that shine. I let them talk. Jeremy mentioned a lawyer. Nancy started jotting down inventory ideas in her phone. They never once asked how I was sleeping, if I needed help with the garden, if I was lonely. When they finally left, Jeremy kissed the top of my head and said, "We just want to make sure everything's taken care of, Mom." Taken care of. I nodded and locked the china cabinet that night. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, holding my hand out, watching the ruby catch the lamplight. Still fit, still mine. Tom may be gone, but I'm not, and I won't be divided like a box of old clothes. I never had much, not the way other women did, not closets full of heels or drawers lined with velvet. But what I had I chose carefully, one by one, piece by piece. Each thing I kept had a weight that couldn't be measured in carats. It carried breath, memory, pain sometimes, but always truth. The gold bangle came first, a gift from my mother the week I turned 16. She saved for months, ironing shirts, mending hems for the women up the road, just to buy it from a jeweler who didn't usually speak to folks like us. It was thin, slightly dented on the edge, but when I wore it, I felt like I belonged somewhere. She slipped it onto my wrist and said, "This is yours, not borrowed, not secondhand, yours." I didn't take it off for years, not even after her funeral, when the house filled with the smell of lilies and overcooked meat. I still wear it when I need to feel her hand on mine, when I stir soup on a cold day, or when I feel myself slipping into silence. She's in that bracelet, still steady, still warm. Then there's the locket, oval, brass, scratched from years of touch. It held a small black and white photo of Harold in uniform, eyes too serious for a boy of 19. He gave it to me the night before he left, tucked it into my coat pocket like a secret. He didn't say much, just held me longer than usual and whispered, "This way, I'm always close." I wore that locket through every letter, every winter, every wait. And I kept wearing it when he came back, but different, quieter. Some part of him had stayed overseas, buried in a field I would never see. I used to open the locket in the dark, just to remember his eyes before the war. The locket doesn't shine anymore, but his face is still there. So is the ache. The pearl earrings? Those were mine, not a gift, not an heirloom. I bought them myself, after I lost the second baby. I remember walking into the store, eyes swollen, body hollow. The woman behind the counter looked surprised when I pointed to them. Small, soft white pearls and silver hooks, delicate. Nothing flashy, but solid. I didn't smile, didn't even try them on. I just said, "Wrap them, please." And I wore them that whole year, like armor no one could see. They weren't for anyone else. They were proof that some things still belonged to me, that I hadn't disappeared completely. Calvin once asked me why I never sold my jewelry. "You could get a good bit for that locket, Grandma." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because he didn't know. They don't know what these pieces held. They see shine, or weight, or value. I see moments, private wars, wounds that scarred over quietly. There's a ring with a cracked sapphire, from the night I almost left Harold, before the children. We argued until the sun came up. Then he knelt beside the bed, held out the ring I didn't know he'd bought, and said, "Don't give up on me yet." I didn't. Not that night. Not for the next 35 years. The crack never got fixed. I didn't want it to. I keep these pieces in a small wooden box lined with blue velvet. The lid creaks when you open it, and the hinges are rusted. But when I lift the top, it smells like lavender and old paper, like memory, like time that still lives inside something. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, I sit by the window and run my fingers across each piece. I close my eyes and feel my mother's voice, Harold's laugh before he grew tired, the baby I never held but still think of when the wind is just right. These aren't decorations. They're not assets. They're not the estate. They're survival. They're the story I never got to tell at dinner. The strength I wore when no one saw me crying in the pantry or folding laundry like it held me together. When I die, they'll open the box. They'll divide things, label bags, maybe sell what they don't want. That's all right. They don't have to understand. But I hope, just once, they hold a piece and feel something, even if they don't know why. I always thought a wake came after the body was gone. But this one? I was still breathing, still pouring tea, still remembering birthdays no one else seemed to. Jeremy called it a practical family meeting, said I should make arrangements while I'm still of sound mind, still able to decide. I smiled and said, of course, because what else do mothers do when their sons look at them like a list of items? I dusted the dining room, set out lemon bars on the good china, lit the candle Tom brought back from Vermont, the one that smells like pine and winters that didn't hurt. They arrived with tight hugs and empty eyes. Rebecca brought her notepad. Nancy wore heels that echoed down the hallway like a countdown. Tom asked if the house had been appraised recently. I watched them from the kitchen, fingers wrapped around my mug, lips pressed to chamomile steam. I counted who asked how I was. Rebecca did, in passing. Jeremy didn't. He just sat at the head of the table like he'd already inherited the chair. They called it a conversation about the future, but really, they were dividing the bones. I'd love the sapphire ring, Nancy said, running a hand over her hair like she was at a job interview. Rebecca wanted the recipe box, for nostalgia, she said, though she's never cooked a thing that didn't come from a screen. Tom mentioned the property lines. Jeremy asked if I had a burial plan. Not one of them looked at the quilt draped over the back of the sofa, the one I stitched the winter Harold's health began to slip. Not one asked about the books by my bed or the bird feeder I filled every morning. They didn't see me. They saw pieces. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a family gathering. It was a living wake. So I played hostess, smiled politely, passed the lemon bars, poured sweet tea with shaking hands, and counted heartbeats between each sentence. I didn't tell them that I'd already made my will. I didn't say that everything had been arranged long ago, in quiet, handwritten notes tucked in drawers, in small envelopes sealed with wax and love. I didn't tell them who would get what, because by then I had already decided who deserved to know. It wasn't about diamonds. It was about who wiped the table after supper, who brought flowers on a Wednesday just because, who remembered that I like raspberry jam, not strawberry. They stayed for just under 2 hours, not long enough to miss me, but long enough to count the silverware. Nancy took photos of the china. Jeremy paced by the bookshelf, fingers tracing the spines, eyes searching for anything worth keeping. Rebecca asked if I needed help with anything. I almost believed her. But then her phone buzzed and she said, "Oh, just a sec," and walked out of the room. So I sat back, folded my hands in my lap, and watched. And grieved, not for myself, but for what we used to be. We used to laugh around this table, used to play cards and cheat on purpose just to see Harold roll his eyes. We used to toast burnt pies and ugly sweaters. We used to be a family. Now, we're a meeting, an agenda, a future divided by square footage and stones. When they left, I stood on the porch and waved like I always do. Then I went inside, washed the dishes by hand, and let the candle burn to the bottom. I sat in the quiet for a long while, long enough for the house to breathe again, to shake off their footsteps, to remember that it belongs to me, still. I reached for the quilt, ran my fingers over every stitch, every square sewn in the hush of heartache, in the flicker of late-night worry, in the rhythm of hope. They didn't ask about it, didn't even see it. But that's all right. Some things aren't meant to be inherited. Some things live in the quiet. Some things stay with you until the very last breath. I noticed the crack in the front window sometime after the first frost. It was thin, barely visible unless the light hit it just right, but still, it bothered me. A quiet fracture in an otherwise still world. I meant to fix it. I even wrote it on a list, circled it twice. But days got shorter, hands got stiffer, and somehow it stayed cracked, like most things in this house, just a little broken, but still standing. Clara wasn't anyone I knew, not at first. She worked mornings at the diner down the road, one of those girls with quick eyes and a ponytail that bounced when she moved. Always wore a blue bandana tied at the crown of her head. She started bringing my coffee out to the car when I came by. Said it was easier that way, no need for me to shuffle across the icy lot. I'd nod, hand her a crumpled 5, and say thank you. She'd always smile and say, "See you tomorrow, Miss Evelyn." I don't remember telling her my name, but somehow she knew it. That winter, the wind howled worse than usual. It whistled right through the crack in the glass, waking me up with a sharp chill that wrapped around my ankles like regret. One morning, I was outside trying to tape a piece of plastic over it, cursing under my breath and fumbling with the edges. That's when Clara pulled up in her rusted pickup. She didn't say much, just looked up at the window and said, "You want me to fix that?" I blinked, hands frozen, heart skeptical. She didn't owe me a thing. "I've got the tools in the back," she said, already walking toward the truck. "I used to help my granddad patch windows in the orchard house." I opened my mouth to protest, to say she didn't need to or that I'd figure it out, but instead I just stepped aside. Sometimes grace doesn't knock. Sometimes it just shows up in muddy boots with a toolbox. She worked fast, didn't ask for anything, didn't make small talk, just whistled quietly through her teeth while she measured the frame. I stood there with my tea, watching. "You remind me of my Nana," she said finally, without looking at me. She always had tape on the windows and soup on the stove. Then she laughed, soft and low. Didn't like asking for help either. That stung a little, because it was true. I didn't like kneading, not anymore. When she was done, she dusted off her hands and said, "Should hold you through the winter at least." I offered her money, folded a 20 in my palm and tried to pass it to her. She just shook her head. "No, ma'am, just glad I caught you before the cold really hits." And that was it. She climbed back into her truck and drove off, waving once through the window, the new one. That night, the wind still blew, but the house didn't groan. The cold stayed outside. And for the first time in weeks, I slept all the way through. I don't think Clara knew what she gave me. It wasn't just a fixed window. It was the reminder that kindness didn't always come with strings, that someone, a stranger no less, could look at me and not see a task or an obligation or a burden wrapped in cardigans and soft wrinkles. She just saw someone who reminded her of love and acted on it. That window has stayed sealed ever since. I clean it more than the others, not because it's newer, but because when the light comes through it now, it feels different. It feels like someone saw me. And that lasts longer than any pane of glass. Clara wasn't my daughter, not by blood, but if there's such a thing as soul kin, she was mine. She came into my life the way good things often do, gently, unexpectedly, and when I wasn't looking for anything at all. It started with a cracked window. The old frame in the kitchen had given up after the last rain. I had it covered with plastic and tape, nothing elegant, but it kept the cold out. Clara showed up that afternoon with a bucket of tools and a smile, said, "You remind me of my Nana." That was all. Didn't ask for a dime, didn't hover, just patched it up, cleaned the sill, and made us both a cup of tea before she left. She kept coming after that, sometimes to fix things, sometimes just to sit. She didn't prod or pry, just sat next to me on the porch, legs tucked under her, hands warm around a chipped mug. We watched the birds, the road, the light shifting on the orchard trees. People always ask questions, you know. How'd you manage after Harold died? Didn't the kids help? What about the house, the bills, the business? Clara never asked. She just came. And so one evening I handed her the bag. It was nothing to look at, a simple brown paper bag, folded twice at the top. She turned it over like it might hold a sandwich or an old letter. Then she peeked inside. I watched her eyebrows lift. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. "Gold?" she finally whispered. I nodded. It was all there, the jewelry I'd been quietly collecting over the years. A few coins from Harold's father, tucked in velvet pouches, 2 gold bangles from my own wedding day, worn thin at the edges, a pendant shaped like a star, tiny diamonds catching the last rays of dusk. It wasn't just money, it was memory, it was years. She looked up at me then, eyes glassy. But why? I took a sip of my tea. It had gone lukewarm. Because you never asked. She sat there stunned, like her body couldn't figure out what to do next, whether to cry or laugh or just keep holding that bag like it might disappear. I've learned over time that people show you who they are by the things they don't say. My children, well, they were full of plans for me, for the house, the money, the inheritance. One even suggested putting me in a nice little place so they could manage things better. That was the same week the locks on my storage shed were changed. But Clara, she showed up with tea and quiet and her rough little hands that smelled like rosemary and motor oil. She never reached for more. I wanted her to have something, not out of charity, not out of pity, but because I saw her, the way she worked, the way she loved, the way she tucked her pain into her sleeves and kept going. The gold meant nothing to me now, but to her, I knew it could mean freedom. A car that didn't stall, a new roof, maybe even a little bakery like she always whispered about when she thought I wasn't listening. She leaned over and hugged me then. It surprised us both. We weren't the hugging kind, but I let myself melt into her. Just for a moment. The porch creaked under our weight, the wind carried the smell of lavender from the edge of the garden, and for a long time neither of us said anything, just sat side by side as the sun slipped behind the hills and the sky went from lilac to blue to the kind of black that holds stars. I don't think she'll ever tell anyone about that bag, not because I asked her not to, I didn't, but because she understands. Some things aren't gifts, they're acknowledgments. She left an hour later, holding the bag like it weighed more than it did. Maybe it did. After she drove off, I stayed there on the porch, the chair next to me still warm. I could hear the night birds starting up, and in the distance, laughter from a neighbor's house. A life going on. Mine had quieted, but not ended. There were still stories in me, still reckonings, still grace, and still one more person who hadn't yet come home. The phone started ringing just after noon. I was chopping carrots at the time, the thick, sweet kind from the market down by the old bridge. The kitchen window was open, and the breeze smelled like warm earth and honeysuckle. The phone rang again, then again. Lisa always did prefer to call in clusters. Like if she dialed fast enough, she could force me to need her. I wiped my hands on my apron and glanced at the screen. Her name. 3 missed calls. Then Tom's. I didn't pick up. Instead, I stirred the soup. A slow, steady swirl, the kind that calms your bones and keeps you tethered to the moment. I already knew what they wanted. Clara must have said something, maybe not even on purpose. Maybe a neighbor saw her leave with the paper bag. Maybe someone overheard something at the market. News travels fast when people think there's treasure in it. I ladled the broth into a chipped bowl, sat down at the little table by the window. Outside, the birds were arguing over something in the garden. Life, I suppose. The phone lit up again. Tom this time. He never used to call unless it involved money or appearances. He always talks like a man who thinks he's doing you a favor by speaking slowly. I didn't pick up. Instead, I ate my soup, 1 spoon at a time, tasting the garlic, the thyme, thinking about how Clara had cried when she found the emerald ring at the bottom of the bag. It used to be my mother's. She wore it every Sunday, whether she had somewhere to go or not. Said, a woman should wear her beauty, even if no one notices but her. That ring meant something once. Then it just meant arguments. Who'd get it when I was gone? Who deserved it? But Clara never once asked about my jewelry, never eyed my fingers or lingered too long at the dresser. That's why she got it. Simple as that. I swept the porch after lunch. It had rained the night before, so the boards were damp, and the leaves stuck like stubborn thoughts. I took my time. Let the broom whisper across the wood. Let the silence settle again. The phone buzzed once more, this time a voicemail. I didn't listen. They weren't calling to check on me. They never asked how I slept or whether the porch roof still leaked. They wanted what they thought was theirs. They thought blood meant ownership. But they forgot, love isn't a transaction. It's the quiet tea shared on hard days, the window fixed without asking, the meals cooked when no one's watching. I had given that emerald to the only person who never expected it, and somehow that made it shine brighter. Later that evening, the sun dipped low, throwing gold across the porch railing. I sat out there with a blanket over my knees and the radio humming old country songs low and soft. The phone didn't ring again, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty about choosing my own peace. I didn't feel like I owed them anything. They'd had years to notice me, to ask, to care. But when the line stayed silent, so did they. Now that something was gone, suddenly I was worth calling. Funny how that works. I closed my eyes for a bit, let the cool breeze kiss my cheeks. The kind of quiet settled around me that feels earned, not empty. There's a difference, you know. I found out about the meeting from Linda. She meant well, always has, but she still speaks like a daughter trying to be gentle with her mother's fading mind. "They just want to talk, Mom," she said over the phone. "You haven't really been yourself lately." I let the silence answer for me. What she meant was, I gave away things they thought belonged to them. What they couldn't say out loud was, they wanted to redraw the lines of control, the house, the will, the story. But the story isn't theirs to tell. They inherited my name, not my life. That Sunday, they all gathered at Jeremy's house. The group text said 2 p.m. "Bring your notes," Lisa wrote. "We need a plan." I saw the messages as I watered the mint near the porch steps. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. I knew what they'd say. They'd mention the emeralds first, then the paper bag, then Clara. They'd speak in that soft, condescending tone they think doesn't sting. Lisa would say I was lonely. Tom would suggest a financial advisor. Jeremy, bless him, would lean back in his chair and say, "We just want what's best for her." I could hear it all before it even happened. Instead of attending, I baked. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and browned butter. I moved slowly, methodically, measuring out peace in teaspoons. I wore Harold's old cardigan that day, the one with the frayed cuffs and the missing button near the collar. It still smelled faintly of tobacco and wood smoke. It made me feel steady, anchored. I sat on the porch with a slice of warm cake and a thermos of coffee, let the afternoon sun land soft on my face. And I thought about the name they were so eager to protect. Mom. That word. It's heavy, carved out of years spent holding everyone else's world together with hands that were always too tired and a voice that softened even when it wanted to scream. They thought Mom meant I belonged to them, that I was a role, a relic, a branch in their family tree they could prune and direct. But I was never just Mom. Before them, I was Evelyn, and lately, quietly, I've been giving that name back to myself. I gave it piece by piece to Clara, not because she asked, but because she listened. She never once called me Mom. She called me Evelyn. And when she said it, it didn't sound like a title. It sounded like a story. I've spent decades being reduced to caretaker, to grandmother, to burden. But Clara looked at me and saw the woman who lived through it all, not the leftovers, the whole. I wasn't confused. I was reclaiming. And that day, while they sat around a table drawing charts and talking over each other, I was sitting in the sun, remembering who I was before they needed me. Linda texted around 4. "We voted on some next steps. Please don't be upset." I smiled, folded the napkin on my lap. I didn't even open the rest of the message. It was always easier for them to believe I'd lost my grip than to face the truth. I had simply let go of theirs. I spent the evening on the porch. Birds quieted, light faded. The wind picked up just enough to rattle the wind chimes Harold hung decades ago. I rocked gently in my chair, coffee still warm in the cup. The house behind me felt full, not of people, but of presence. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I was home. There's a silence in this house I've grown to love. It's not empty, it's full, full of memory, of breath, of time settling like dust on the windowsill. They used to call every day, my children. Well, not to check in, to check on. Did you take your pills? You really shouldn't be using the stairs, Mom. Have you thought more about the condo near Lisa? I nodded along, smiled into the phone, said I'd think about it. But what I was really thinking about was Clara. Clara, who never asked me to move. Clara, who knocked before coming in, even after I gave her the spare key. She makes tea the way I like it, oversteeped and too sweet. She writes little notes on my fridge. Left soup on the stove. Don't forget to eat. And when I speak, really speak, she doesn't finish my sentences for me. She lets the words arrive on their own. That, too, is love. Last week, I found an old recipe card tucked in my sewing drawer, the one for cardamom bread. My mother's handwriting, faded and delicate. I hadn't made it in years, but I did that day. I set it on the window rack to cool, just like she used to. The smell filled the house, sugar, spice, something old and warm. Clara came by just as I was slicing it. She didn't say anything, just sat beside me and reached for a piece. We chewed in silence. Then she said, "You should write more of these down. They'll want them someday." They, my children, the same ones who call once a week now, if that. Too busy, they say, too far. They'll come back one day, for the recipe box, for the rings, for the house maybe, but they won't know what to do with the rest. They won't know that the third stair creaks unless you step just right, that Harold's tools are still in the shed, arranged by how often he used them, that the ivy by the back fence grows thicker every year but only blooms after rain. They won't know how many nights I sat on the porch waiting for someone who never arrived, or how often I forgave without being asked. But Clara knows, because she stayed long enough to see it, to feel it. They think legacy is a will, a ledger, a lawyer's signature and blue ink. But I've been leaving mine behind in other ways. A hug that lingered, a story told slowly, a hand on Clara's when the words wouldn't come. I wrote my truth on recipe cards and in the pauses between phone calls, in the way I folded linens, in the way I let go of anger, even when it still had sharp teeth. There's an old photo of me on the shelf. I'm 23, wearing a polka dot dress and Harold's coat over my shoulders. I look so alive in it, so certain. Sometimes I catch Clara staring at it. She doesn't say anything, just smiles a little. She sees me, not just the skin I'm in now, but the woman who walked through fire to build something that lasted. The kids will show up when I'm gone. They'll open drawers and find scraps of my life they never asked about while I was here. They'll ask each other, why did she keep this? Who's this letter to? What do we do with all of this? And maybe, just maybe, they'll pause long enough to feel it, to feel me. Not as a burden, not as a signature on a dotted line, but as the woman who kept showing up, even when no one noticed. I am still here, in the way the garden leans toward the light, in the hum of the old ceiling fan, in the folded quilts and the chipped mugs and the soft creak of the porch swing. I'm not where they expect me to be, but I never really was I? I was always in the in-between places, the quiet rooms, the spaces between need and knowing, between being asked and being seen. I've thought about my funeral more than I care to admit, not in a morbid way, just in that quiet, curious way old women do when the world begins to carry on without them. They'll hold it in a church I haven't stepped foot in for years. Not out of spite, I just found more truth in birdsong and bread dough than in pews and sermons. Lisa will cry the way people cry when they're supposed to. Tom will stand stiff in the corner, looking at his watch between condolences. Jeremy will speak. Of course he will. He has a voice made for it, steady, rehearsed, just emotional enough. He'll say I was strong-willed, that I loved my family, that I held firm beliefs, even when they didn't make sense to anyone else. They'll nod along, say I was stubborn, say I gave everything away to people who weren't even blood. And they'll think they're telling the truth, but they won't know half of it. They won't know what it cost me to smile through a dinner where they spoke over me, what it felt like to hear them joke about Clara like she was a stray dog I'd taken in. How many nights I sat with my wedding ring in my hand, wondering if love and loyalty were ever really the same thing. They won't know the taste of the soup I made the day I didn't answer their calls, or how heavy that paper bag felt before I passed it to Clara, or the way my name, Evelyn, sounded when someone said it without needing anything from me. They won't remember the porch, the long silences I filled with tea and stories I never told, the recipes I didn't write down because I wanted someone to ask. They'll remember what was convenient, what they could explain, what fit neatly into the shape of a eulogy. But maybe, just maybe, Clara will be there, tucked in the back, quiet like always. And maybe, just once, she'll stand. No speech, no drama, just her voice, steady and small, and she'll say, "She gave me her time." That's all. Not her money, not her house, not her blessing, her legacy, or her permission. Her time. The afternoons we spent watching the wind move through the orchard, the evenings when we didn't speak, and it still felt like a conversation. The way I taught her to braid bread dough and let it rise with patience, not because she needed it, but because she asked. Time is the only thing I ever owned outright, and I gave it to someone who noticed. That should count for something. When they lay me down, they'll place roses on the casket. Too many, too white, too late. They'll say I was a pillar and a fighter and a matriarch. All words that sound nice when you don't want to say, she was tired, she was disappointed, she stopped asking for things no one wanted to give. But if Clara says I gave her my time, then she'll know I lived. Not just existed, not just endured, but lived, right up to the soft, quiet edge of the end. And that's more than most people can say. I stopped wearing my wedding ring 2 winters ago, not in anger, not because I stopped loving Harold, but because I finally realized love wasn't something I needed to prove anymore. For 50 years, that ring was a promise to him, to the children, to the version of myself that kept quiet so everyone else could speak. But one morning, while washing dishes, I felt it slip on my finger, loose, not because I'd gotten thinner, but because I'd started letting go. I dried my hands, took it off, set it gently in the drawer with the others, the emeralds, the anniversary band, the tiny gold circle I wore when I still believed being a wife meant disappearing a little. I haven't put it back on since. Now, most mornings, I wear Harold's old cardigan instead. The gray one with the stretched out sleeves and a hole at the cuff. It smells like cedar and dust and something sweet I can't quite name. It's soft at the elbows from years of reaching, for children who grew distant, for answers I never got, for a hand that left too soon. Funny, isn't it? The things we wear when we finally stop dressing for other people. I used to think freedom would come like thunder, big, loud, a sweeping gesture, a slammed door, a sharp word, a one-way ticket to anywhere. But when it came, it was quiet. It was the choice to stay home from a family meeting, the decision to bake bread on a day filled with voicemails, the soft no whispered into a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Freedom is slow. It creeps in through cracks you didn't notice. A bird at the window, a girl who knocks before entering, a name said gently, like someone trying to return it to you. I pass the mirror sometimes and barely recognize her, the woman I was. She wore pearls when asked, smiled when dismissed. She stood in family photos like furniture, placed, necessary, unseen. But now I walk slower, but I feel everything. The pull of the breeze when I open the porch door, the texture of sun-warmed sheets as I fold them, alone, without bitterness, the weight of silence that no longer feels like punishment. The truth is, I wasn't stripped, not by Harold's death, not by the children's indifference, not even by the stories they told about me when I stopped giving them what they wanted. I chose. I chose to give the gold to Clara, not out of rebellion, but recognition. I chose to stop explaining myself to people who only listen to respond. I chose to see myself not as mother or widow or burden, but as Evelyn, whole, still, enough. Some days I still ache. Grief doesn't end, it just changes shape. But now when I cry, it isn't from the hollow of being forgotten. It's from the quiet joy of being known. Clara came by yesterday with new tea towels and bruised peaches she got for cheap. She didn't stay long, just long enough to sit, share a cup, ask about the garden. Before she left, she hugged me, and I realized not a single person in this family has hugged me in years without it meaning something else. Pity, performance, pretense. But Clara, she hugged like it mattered, like I mattered. That's freedom too, not just being alone, but being held without being asked to shrink.